There we go. We're very pleased to have Mike Crowley here, member of the Task Force for Linguistic Quality, among many other things. Mike, thank you for agreeing to participate and welcome.
Good afternoon, David. How are we doing today?
Very good. Thank you. So we
Great.
typically start this process by getting just a little bit of background information from each of our participants, just for context. We don't try to get too personal. So I'd like to start off by asking you where your parents were born.
Okay. My father was born in Montreal, and my mother was born in Eastern Ontario, and at a very young age, the whole family relocated to Montreal.
Okay. And where were you born, Mike?
Montreal.
Okay. And where did you receive your education? Any elementary, secondary, and any post-secondary?
Okay. Elementary, secondary was on the South Shore of Montreal. Post-secondary was in Montreal, and 1 year in London, Ontario.
Okay, very good. And what is your or was your occupation?
I was a paramedic.
Okay. And where do you live now?
I live in the same house that I was brought into the world in. So kind of a stick in the mud. I don't move around. But no, it's home for me over here. So.
Okay, the next set of questions are really what I call the meat of the matter here. It's questions concerning your experience living in Quebec today. And we're going to start out by asking you, what in your experience and in your mind right now is the best thing about living in Quebec?
The best thing about living in Quebec. I'd have to say there is a vibe. If you take Montreal versus Toronto, Montreal has more of a communal feeling, where I find that in Toronto it's a little colder. There's a fantastic multiculturalism, and we're blessed with all the things that come with it, with finding other people's traditions and customs, which can be very interesting. The food is amazing, and Montreal's always had a more of a laid-back type of laissez-faire attitude. It changed a little bit more when the French Catholic Church lost the reins over government, and more things opened up on Sunday. But if we look at the way things were, they were much more conservative in the rest of Canada than they were over here anyway. And there was just a more easygoing, laid-back style of living that was more conducive to where I wanted to be.
Okay. Now, the next question, a lot of people have trouble with. Certainly, if I was asked this question, I would have trouble with it. But I'm going to ask you to respond to the question as is, and then you are free to elaborate as much as you care to on your response. So, having said that, I'll just ask you the question. Describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word.
Oppressed. It's too bad. There's so many other good things that come with it, but if I look at the main thing, it's oppressed, discriminated against, whichever.
And where do you feel most at home in Quebec? For example, in communities based on language or culture, profession, or geographic location?
Ooh, that's a very loaded question. Excuse me. I can feel totally at home in a totally francophone environment, where we laugh, we have a great time, and nobody's judging me on my linguistic background, my linguistic abilities, and we're all there having a great time. Other times there can be other challenges that can come in. So I guess it depends on who the people are going to be that you're going to be associating with, as to whether it'll be a hostile or a friendly type of an atmosphere. I definitely will always be more comfortable in my own Anglophone milieu, and that's probably more because of more customs and social things and bits of humor that wouldn't make it across the linguistic boundaries, because it just wouldn't work. And it's, if there's jokes in French that'll never work in English that are hilarious, and vice versa. So it's this, that, but no, I'd have to say that being in kind of almost, well, I wouldn't say I'm cocooned, far from that, but I am more comfortable in my own community, but I can feel very comfortable within the Francophone community, as long as I'm associating with people who are not out to try and pick a fight or an argument or something like that. And so I can feel comfortable in either. The most comfortable is always going to be in my own, but I don't deprive myself of being able to go and associate and enjoy myself in a French environment. Not a problem.
Okay. Now the next question, I'm going to preface it by a lot of people have trouble with it, and I get that, but I'm going to explain it a little bit. The second part of the question is a two-part question. Talks about the official definition in Quebec. Now, people say, well, according to who? Great question. And the question is crafted because we want to know your perception of the official definition. It could be the Quebec government, it could be the Canadian government, it could be what you see in the media, it could be among your peers. So whatever you perceive the official definition of Quebec to be. So having said that, I'm going to ask the two-part question. How would you define a Quebecer? And do you think the official definition in Quebec includes you?
I will always go to what René Lévesque said, because he was the voice of Francophone Quebecers at the time, and things have evolved in an awful lot, in a very big way, have gotten nastier since he left us. And I believe that René Lévesque wouldn't be happy with what he would see today. René Lévesque said very clearly, if you pay taxes, you're a Quebecer. And that definition has gone on to take many mutations over the years, and it's no longer that. And the people in the government right now have their own version. But if we go back to the roots, and in the later years of the silent revolution, that's what it meant, according to René Lévesque, who represented the people. So that's what it should still be. But there are an awful lot of people who are extremely discriminatory towards anything other than their own language and culture. People who have a real petty vindictiveness towards the Anglophone community. In some cases, they had reason to be not happy with the events that happened, but that's 100 years ago, and I wasn't there to do it, so don't hold it against me. So I believe that there's the original, and then there's the new more ethnocentric nationalist version of what it is, which is uh, Pure Laine de Souche, basically. And it's funny that I would see someone who was coming from another country. They could have come from Haiti, where they could already speak French. They could be coming from a Hispanic country, and they'd see that I was an Anglophone, and they'd say, "Oh, vous n'êtes pas Québécois." Well, I was born here, and they weren't. But and it's not because it's not their fault. Basically, for them to have had such a notion, such an idea, it had to be taught to them. It had to be something that they're instructed to do, or kind of encouraged to do, rather than something that they came up with.
Okay, having said that, has your sense of identity as a Quebecer changed over the years? And if so, in what ways?
I'd have to say that today I feel like I'm a stranger or a visitor in my own home, rather than being part of what the decor is. I'm no longer the owner of anything. I'm kind of like a guest or a tenant here at the at the mercy of whoever's making the laws at the time, or how they want to interpret the laws, or how what their ideology is towards anyone who isn't Pure Laine de Souche. So it's hard to say. And again, most Quebecers are not like that. Even we're talking the Francophone Quebecers. It's something that was basically encouraged. It's an encouraged behavior that was brought into them through politics.
Now, what you've touched on this before, but I'll ask the question anyway. What are some of the most difficult things about living in Quebec today?
Okay. As far as managing in Quebec, my French is more than adequate to get me through anything I need. So to navigate through, it's okay. But Anglophones are faced with, and let's not forget that we are one of the founding peoples, and as you can see on the flag in back of me, it represents, the only thing missing is, if I turn my head, is the people who were there ahead of us all, which were the First Nations. So we're allowed to have signs inside an establishment that are English, as long as it's only half the size. And that is to protect the French language, which I have no problem with the French language being protected. However, how does that protect the French language when the language is half the size? Now, the thing that gets even worse on that is, I was over in the McGill University Hospital Center. Questionnaires that you will fill out, medical questionnaires, the text of the French on that questionnaire, it's a bilingual questionnaire, the text is smaller in English than it is in French on a questionnaire. How does that protect the French language? And basically, it is the interpretation of someone at the Office de la Langue Française who would take that and say, well, you'll have to do it on your forms, and these are all signs, and they're very creative in the way that they want to try and apply these types of laws and whatever. And you think back to what's his name, the Lucien Bouchard, who said, when you go to the hospital, you go for a blood test, not a language test. And that was a very clear message that came out in 1995 when he was the head of the Parti Québécois. So we're talking about 30 years ago, just shy of. But that was well after all these different interpretations had come through. But still, it gets projected onto us, and it's it's as if they want to humiliate us every day, that to try and erase our existence, which they have done in history books and whatnot. They've changed that, and it's just a constant psychological what's the cauldron or challenge. It's a challenge we're faced with every day. It's something that's I see it's an everyday discrimination that's meant to wear us down and to try and make us acquiesce to everything and abandon who we are, our identity, our culture, our language, and to just become who they want us to be, which is them, which I don't think they have any right to ask us to do that any more than we do to ask them to do that. We all have the right to exist, but they have the numbers to make the votes to say, well, no, that's not what it's going to be.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask the next question. I mean, you've alluded to it in some of your other responses, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. In recent years, members of Quebec's Francophone majority have identified a number of linguistic and cultural threats. Which of these do you share and support, and which of these concerns make you feel excluded or targeted?
I forget what the whole list was of all their threats that they listed. So I'd have to have the list in front of me to go through it. But where some are okay, they're legitimate. Others are ridiculous. But I think the biggest thing is that they use the stick and not the carrot in order to try and achieve these things. And for myself, my mother, when she moved to the South Shore here, she spoke no French and she was embarrassed. Everybody would have to change to English when she was around in certain circles that they went, that they did associate in. And she felt embarrassed that everybody had to change what they were speaking to accommodate her. And she said, you will not be faced with that. And that's why we went for our early years in primary school to French, to learn it, to make sure. We started in French kindergarten. My parents made that effort. And today, my children went to bilingual school. You have bilingual or you have French immersion, but there's no such a thing as pure English school anymore. And that's fine. The students come out being bilingual, and that's a huge plus. So the Anglophone community has done an awful lot in all kinds of ways to. I don't think we're trying to assimilate, but we're trying to be able to participate fully in Quebec, either in French or in English, as need be. And we don't have a problem for the most part, although, listen, there's always going to be some people, we've all met a few of them that they want to have another revision of the Plains of Abraham to do something to eliminate the French language, which is definitely not something that we want to see. But we have some people who are just as radical. We're not there anymore. That doesn't describe who we are. There's no big fat ladies at Eaton's. There is no more Eaton's. We've come an awful long way into I wouldn't say assimilating, but really blending in with the society of Quebec and becoming fully functional. We're not trying to cause anybody any strife, but at the same time, we really don't want to be walked all over, which is basically what's happening right now.
Okay, having said that, what in your mind is the biggest problem facing Quebec as a whole today, and how in your mind do you think it can be resolved?
The biggest problem, I think, is not just one party, but several parties that are extremely based on ethnocentric nationalism. And especially in the far out regions where they have a smaller population for the same amount of seats as compared to Montreal, they've got the numbers to achieve what they want to do in the National Assembly. And an awful lot of those people who are in the far-flung edges of the province, not all, because you can't say everybody is that way, because that's not true. But there's enough that'll be swayed by the fear-mongering that's been happening for a long time. And at one time it was in some ways justifiable, but it is not today. And as long as we have a government that works on that, and they've found that it is a winner in order to get elected, I don't know what we can do, but we need a government of common sense rather than one that is totally bitter against anything and anybody who doesn't fit their little mold. It's tough. And again, we have to definitely respect the fact that we have a majority language of Francophones here in the province. And I think that as an Anglophone community, we have respected that for the most part. Most people are bilingual. If you take people from 60 up, you'll find it to be less obvious. But from 60 down, you'll find it to be much more prevalent. And even for people my age, and I'm in my mid 60s, it's, I'd have to say, pretty well everybody I know in my age group is bilingual. So it's not like the old days anymore.
Now, the next question, Mike, I'm borrowing with permission, by the way, from Guy Rogers. I know you saw his documentary, and he
Mhm.
used this tool very effectively in his documentary, and I am going to use it in the next question. So I'd like you to indicate by a show of fingers on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being weakest, 10 being strongest, how strongly do you feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges?
That is that's a really hard question to, I'd have to say,
That's great.
and I'm trying to be optimistic.
I understand. So I'm going to give you one opportunity, as I do with everybody, to say anything you'd like to about your sense of identity or belonging in Quebec.
My sense of identity or belonging in Quebec, it's something that's, again, that's a tough one. I believe that uh, I have worked hard as a paramedic. I help keep the people of Montreal safe. My father is a 34-year-old, 34-year veteran of the Montreal Police. He worked hard to keep the people of Montreal safe. I had aunts who were nurses. My mother was a medical secretary in the hospital. Our participation, what we've done for everybody, and no matter what their language, religion, color, whatever. My father was 10 years in the mounted police in Montreal, and he used to be there all the time, and he fought all the time that he would open the parade. He'd be the first horse out on the St. Patrick's Day parade. And he said, you guys get the Saint Jean Baptiste, but I get the St. Patrick's Day parade. And so they were able to say, okay, fine. Now, the St. Patrick's Day parade was something that was, and still is today, much more acceptable, even though it's an Anglophone institution, because the Irish, especially the Irish Catholic and the French Catholics, got along very, very, very well back because they both hated the king or the queen at the time. So it wasn't seen as a parade of oppression. It was just seen as a parade of celebrating a Catholic saint from Ireland. So I don't believe that we really get the credit that we should be getting for everything that we've done here. Now, we haven't done it in the whole rest of the province because our numbers really weren't that big all the time, although in other places they were. They've dwindled an awful lot. But I don't believe that we really get the credit that we should. And people try to, again, erase an awful lot of what was done because it doesn't fit in with the end objective that they're really looking for. And then again, It's not everybody who's a francophone, but it's the people who are deep rooted in trying to create the divisiveness that the wedge politics works for them in making us the boogeyman that they can point to and say, "Oh, we have to be careful for them. They're going to try and annihilate us or eliminate us." So I believe that myself, I have earned my place to stay here. I have done many things. I have given of myself, working in more than one emergency service, and being woken up in the middle of the night to tend to emergencies that were happening for life or property or fires or whatever. I've paid my dues, and so have so many others, and everybody deserves to have that recognition. And I don't think that it should be based on linguistic or ethnic or religious situations. It should be based on what your efforts were and what your efforts and your services were.
Okay, very good. Mike, thank you very much for your participation today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording now. We can chat.